I'm truly honored to be here, and hopefully over the next 30 minutes I'll be able to give you a little bit of flavor of what we've been doing in Utah for the last 5 or so years and put a little context between Nevada and Utah. Just in terms of setting context, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, it's, we do all live in the Intermountain West, and I like the analogy of the competition is the European Union, Asia, the BRIC countries, and we've got something here in the Intermountain West that's special, and I look for opportunities coming out of this conference to partner Utah and our economic development programs more closely with Nevada. Second point of context is who is Ted McAleer, right? So you might be able to put some of my comments into context. Well, I'm a little bit of blend of the people that you've heard from already. I consider myself a 25-year industry guy, operations manager, mechanical engineer, who's really gone through 2 major inflection points in my career. I started out with Fortune 100 companies after a stint in the Army, spent some time at PepsiCo, spent some time at Procter & Gamble, realized that MBAs make more than engineers, so I went to Harvard Business School and got one of those, and it came out of Fortune 100 and said, what's happening in the economy? What's happening is an internet boom. I went to an internet startup in Utah in 1999. We raised $80 million and had a fun ride for about 5 years. And as I came out of that transition in 2004, 2005, I said, hey, it's now time to focus on Utah. I've been doing pretty well, and it's time for me to say, how can I give back to this new home of Utah? And that's what I've been up to, and I'm going to take you a little bit through that journey from 2004 to the present. So in terms of context, just we've talked about a little bit of Utah and Nevada. I'll just throw up the 2 states there so that you can see the context. We're very similar in terms of people. We're very similar in terms of urban versus rural demographics. And, we like to say that we're a distant suburb of the San Francisco Bay Area and say that you're economically connected to California and Arizona. We both have 2 public research universities, so there's a lot in common there. And I guess the elephant in the room as you go about one of these journeys is politics. So the final piece of context that I'll set up is, who is Ted McAleer in terms of context? Fiscal conservative with a social conscience, and if you wonder where that came from, that was Colin Powell's comment as people asked him if he was going to vote for Obama. And then in terms of Utah, there's 29 counties in Utah. 2 of them voted for Obama, and I live in one of those counties, but I won't tell you which way I voted. So consider me a fiscal conservative with a social conscience who's interested in seeing how we can help use economic development to drive the economies that we both live and work in and love. All right. Just a quick recap of Utah. We kind of call ourselves the BCS buster of economic growth. If you've been following the University of Utah, we just made it to the Pac-10. We've had a pretty good run. Some of the stats on where we stand are listed there. I don't need to repeat those. Utah, we call it a state of opportunity right now. Our motto is life elevated. And there's too much on this page to be able to highlight it for you, but you can see we've driven to a lot of number 1s and number 2s, and Forbes just said we're the best managed state. We're probably most proud of a report that came out of the Millikan Institute calling us number 1 for technology concentration and dynamism, and also very proud of our entrepreneurial culture. So recent results, 2010. As Robert already stated, unemployment rate, we consistently are about 2% below the national average as the economy's going up and going down. We're being predicted as the first folks to emerge out of the recession, and that's what the economists are saying. We've got a AAA bond rating right now with $150 million in our rainy day fund. So if you read the paper yesterday from the Brookings Institute, you saw some of the regional economies. We're sitting in a very, very good position in Utah right now. We're most proud probably from a higher education standpoint of the work that University of Utah has been doing. They embarked on this journey of technology commercialization about 5 or 6 years ago, and have either tied or beat MIT the last 2 years in terms of technology startups. Those are not just pieces of paper. Those are actually companies where we're adding value, adding jobs, and creating revenue for the state of Utah. We also have a private university. Many of you are familiar with BYU. They are very, very productive in terms of technology commercialization. They only have a base of $35 to $40 million a year in research, but very, very productive in terms of technology commercialization. So as you think about those things, I think there's some things you can learn from Utah. All right, why USTAR? I joined the USTAR team in 2005. I was very fortunate when I left my software startup. I went over to the University of Utah. I said, what's going on over here? And there was a new vice president of technology ventures, and he said, I need to hire an industry guy that can talk to academics and business people, and I joined his team. He was given a $350,000 check from the legislature to put together a study, and I was one of the people that happened to be standing in the room and volunteered to lead one of the 6 teams, and I'll talk to you about that journey. But basically what we did is we looked at the 6 different elements of economic development: industry, financial capital, human capital, government policies, research universities, technology commercialization, and we said, how are we going to bring those things together? We had a Republican governor who had just started in 2004, John Huntsman. John is now the ambassador to China. He's a global traveler and really was a visionary that set us on this path. And then USTAR, most importantly, recognized that it's not the governor's office or the legislative office that's going to drive things. It's the industry community. And what we did is we went out like you were doing, and we identified the folks that we could form a joint venture with from the business community with higher education. We got these 4 important partners together and let that industry community kind of drive the vision and give the credit to the governor and the legislature for what we were getting done. So that's where we started. Now, had I had this framework, I'm a systems engineer, I love frameworks. Had I had this framework in 2005, I probably would have gotten my work done a little bit more quickly. But since I've been in this business for the last 5 years, this is my favorite national framework. The National Governors Association likes this. The State Science Technology Institute likes it. It's the 6 elements of technology-based economic development. They've all been talked about already. How do you expand the research infrastructure? How do you ensure that that research infrastructure is new intellectual property? How do you improve the competitiveness of existing industry? We're not about starting new companies necessarily. We're about taking intellectual property and identifying if there's an existing company in Utah that can grow from that intellectual property, and then brokering the relationships between the university and the industry community to use this intellectual property to drive jobs and revenue. Enhancing the science and technology workforce. Robert talked about that a minute ago in terms of where Nevada is. We've been really looking at that statistic and trying to drive that up in Utah. Increasing access to capital. Holy smokes, you guys have billions of dollars of financial capital in wealthy individuals in the state of Nevada. You've got to figure out how to get those folks to invest that money, not just in their existing companies, but invest it back into technology startups. And then we both have entrepreneurial capacity. Utah's been recognized for that, and I've heard 3 of your speakers talk about that this morning. So this is how we were rated in entrepreneurial capacity when we got started on our project in 2005. Utah had 3 cities that had just been identified out of 394 cities for entrepreneurial capacity. And we said, holy smokes, if Austin and San Jose and these other folks can do it, we can do it too. But one of those things that the other folks were doing is driving economic development through their research universities and through partnerships between the research universities and the industry community. And we said, how are we going to do that? I did a little study in the summer of 2005. It took me and 4 interns. Took about 60 days to interview over 100 department chairs at University of Utah and Utah State, and we were looking for what are our innovation assets. Who are the entrepreneurial faculty who believe that this is more than just research and development to sit on a shelf? Okay, these folks were interested in making sure that their ideas get out of the classroom and get into industry. And what we found, I'm a systems engineer, look for the 80-20 rule. Okay, 20% of the faculty are going to drive 80% of the capacity. Well, what I found was the 5-50 rule. 5% of the faculty were driving 50% of the capacity. And so we said, how do we go out and recruit more 5%ers? And that's what we talk about in terms of STAR faculty. You mentioned Georgia that you're benchmarking. Georgia has a endowed scholar program. I don't like to call them scholars. I like to use a baseball analogy and say these are STAR faculty. These are people that when they come in, they can build a team, and that team is going to know how to get research funding out of the federal government, and it knows how to do technology commercialization. And that's what we sought to build. Okay, so we talked about this study in 2005. We said we got to put it into terms that the industry community and the legislature and the governor can understand. So we said, if you give us $25 million a year for investment in STAR faculty, and if you give us $250 million worth of building money, we will build 2 nationally recognized research and development commercialization centers, fill them with STAR faculty and their colleagues, and we'll start to drive $4.9 billion worth of external research funds, 422 new companies. This was the 30-year plan, okay? This was our big, hairy, audacious goal, and it was built around university commercialization. Again, the legislature wanted us to say these are going to be new companies, but what we know is, think of this as 422 pieces of intellectual property that we will develop a business plan for over the next 30 years to either put it into an existing company, create a new industry, or create a new company. So we didn't get $25 million, we didn't get $250 million, but we did pretty good. We got $15 million per year to start the STAR faculty program. We got $160 million from the legislature in terms of mostly general fund and bonding. It all turned into bonding. And we got a $40 million match from the industry community. And then our secret sauce was this third program, the technology outreach program. I'm not afraid to call it the political pork, because in this context, that's what it was. We were going to spend a lot of money in our 2 major counties. How do you get the other 26 counties to come along? We developed a technology outreach program where we were going to take business leaders like myself, deploy them to 5 of the regional higher education institutions. Their job was going to be business development brokers that made sure that the work going on at the 2 Tier 1 research universities was relevant to the communities where those other regional higher education institutions served. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that story. So this is what it kind of looked like. If you're familiar with the Wasatch Front, going from up there in Ogden all the way down to Provo, we actually had 3 regional higher education institutions across the Wasatch Front. We picked a location in our energy sector, which is Utah State University in Vernal out there on the east. And then we picked a sunshine spot down there at St. George, Dixie College, with an outpost at Cedar City. And we decided that we were going to build this business development network, and we were going to connect it with what I call the Virtual Innovation Network, which is the information technology platform that connects together what these folks do in business development, and we started our journey. We adjusted our big, hairy, audacious goal from our $25 million a year to our $15 million a year. And ultimately, what drives me every day is, how am I doing against 242 new companies, 73,000 new jobs, and $3 billion worth of tax revenue? I start every single meeting with my team with this slide, and I say, if you don't think about this every day, then we're going to find somebody who can. All right? So the other way to think about it, my colleague Jack Britton from University of Utah was just out and met with the folks at Reno and UNLV. He used this slide to just relate that other piece that I just talked about. Papers to patents to products, okay? And if you stop, there's many universities that stop at papers, okay? And you've got to develop a culture where intellectual property is just as good as papers, okay? And that is a real cultural transformation at higher education, because their tenure is all about papers. And we brought in a dean of the College of Engineering who had 3 startup companies himself in Michigan, and he started to drive that culture. We brought somebody into our medical school who had 3 startup companies, and he started to drive that culture. And there's a way to have a top-down and a bottoms-up driving of that culture. Okay, then you have to measure results, right? I see Phil sitting here and he's saying, okay, great, good vision, but you got to measure results. How are you going to measure it, Ted? Well, we said it's going to be kind of a journey. Initially, we want to know how well we're doing in recruiting the teams. We want to make sure that those teams, as they come in, are hitting the same kind of research targets that they had before we brought them in. There's kind of a 6 to 12 month lag period while they get their team set up, but we want to see by 12 months that they're driving the same kind of research dollars that they drove in their old home. Then we want to see the intellectual property start to flow, and ultimately it's about what we've got in the upper right-hand corner: new earnings, new jobs, new tax revenue, and we've got to measure that stuff. And in the first 3 years we kind of focused here, and then in the next 2 years we began our new focus. I'll just show you some results real quick. In 2005, our prospectus said that we were going to drive $23 million in research funds. We're up to $44 million, 185% of projections. On the invention disclosures, we're at 189% of what we built, 244% on projected companies, 199% on research grants, and just barely ahead of where we thought we were going to be on jobs. A lot of the jobs in the last 4 years have been driven by construction. We actually invested during a great time. A $70 million building we were designing at Utah State University. We had about $75 million worth of requirements for that $70 million building, and we came in $5 million under budget, right? That's what happens when the construction sector tanks. And if you put the construction sector back to work by building, research, development, and commercialization capacity, you get yourself a good deal. Okay, so I was going to pause for questions, but I'm going to drive through the questions. Just take a little break here and drive into the questions will come this afternoon. So let me just tell you, that's kind of the journey in review. Where were we in February of 05 as you all are sitting here in January 11? Well, we said, hey, legislature, we know we can do this. Give us $350,000 to actually put together a very detailed business plan. Now, if you're in the startup world, you understand that your first seed funding in a startup company might be $150,000, right? It might be $300,000, and that's what we said. We want to write a very, very good business plan. Give us just this little bit of startup capital. Maybe it doesn't come from the legislature. Maybe it comes from the industry community. But we put together these teams. A clusters team. You've already done your clusters analysis. I've heard some of the output there. Technology-based economic development best practices policy team. We studied what was happening in Wisconsin, what's happening in Georgia, what's happening in old economies like Pennsylvania and Ohio. And we said, is there a model that we can build upon, but how do we take the things that they're doing in the other states around the country and develop something that is unique in terms of technology-based economic development for us? Innovation Assets team, that was the team that I led. As I said, we interviewed 80 department chairs to get a sense for whether they wanted to play, okay? If we brought in some new money and they could go out and recruit STAR faculty, is the culture right in that department to recruit those folks, okay? Technology commercialization team. Well, BYU knew how to do technology commercialization. University of Utah was just starting to figure it out, and Utah State had a little bit to learn. But we studied the best practices in technology commercialization and developed a plan there. University infrastructure team. Wow, this one was a challenge. Every single department chair or dean wanted a new building, and we had to decide who was going to get the new building. And we ultimately had to decide that we're going to build interdisciplinary research, development, and commercialization centers, and this is going to be all about a partnership. And we, at the University of Utah, we kind of triangulated on the College of Engineering, the College of Science, and the College of Medicine. At Utah State, we had an asset somewhat like you have in Deseret Research. Ours is called the Space Dynamics Lab. They were doing about $50 million a year in federal research. We said we're going to build around the Space Dynamics Lab and then build around 3 academic colleges at Utah State University that we think can drive this. So that was a little bit of a hairy one, but we got through that. And then ultimately, if you're going to have a business plan, as Phil knows, you better have some numbers. So we had the biggest Excel spreadsheet you've ever seen in our economic prospectus, and we put all of the analysis into some numbers. And I look at those numbers every 90 days. Every 90 days I say, how am I doing? And it drives our performance. All right, so just a quick review. These are the 3 program areas that were funded in March of 06. We started our journey with the $350,000 study grant in May of 05. That $350,000 came out of the February legislative session, and then we basically I think the story comes up here in just a minute, so let me just skate through. Oh, we're going to talk about these 6 elements of technology-based economic development again. That's the story I'm going to use right now to tell you how we're doing at the 4-year mark. But before I get to how we're doing at the 4-year mark, man, I thought I had a slide on the process. Okay, so let me just review the process one more time. Again, February of 2005, we got the study grant. By May, we had the team together. By the next legislative session, we had already presented the economic prospectus, and we were starting our journey. The first people were hired in July of 2006. Actually, we put together the Board of Governance in July of 2006 at the beginning of the fiscal year. I was hired in October of 2006, so I've been at it now for 4 years as the employee number 1 executive director of USTAR. But I kind of knew where we were headed because I'd been part of the team for about 16 to 18 months. And I think that is actually important, to make sure that somebody from the study team gets a leadership role in the implementation team. All right, so how are we doing? Basically, I'm down to 10 minutes, so I'm going to blast through this, but I'm going to highlight technology-based economic development across the top. The first element is research infrastructure. What have we done? 34 faculty hired. That's actually an old stat. We're up to 40. At Utah State, we built our $70 million building and opened it on time, October 7th. At the University of Utah, we got a $15 million funding from Mr. Sorensen and the Sorensen family, and we're building the $130 million Sorensen Molecular Biotechnology building. I'll talk to you more about that. And then we've been creating construction jobs while we've been doing those things. We picked 5 innovation areas. Again, what are you good at, and what are the emerging industries that you want to be good at? And for each of these are pretty generic. I always think in terms of a colon and a hyphen after each one. So in terms of energy, what are we trying to be good at? Well, we're good at fossil energy, and in order for fossil energy to be relevant in the renewable energy future, we've got to do something with that fossil energy. So our focus is energy, carbon management, carbon sequestration. We have won an $80 million grant for carbon sequestration. We've actually found a saline aquifer in the middle of our rural area where we can put millions of tons of CO2. If the feds write some kind of legislation that says that we got to put CO2 out of the atmosphere, we're ready to put the CO2 into a protective holding tank. Well, guess what? You guys have protective holding tanks too up in the mountains where you've been doing some of your nuclear storage. It's actually ideally suited for carbon mitigation. Don't take that one away from us. We stole that faculty member from New Mexico, okay? Biodevice, biopharma. You know, where are we going to be best there? We've actually got a lot of call centers. We've got data centers. eBay just built a data center in Utah. Oracle built a data center. Adobe just built a data center. Why? Because energy costs, pretty cheap in Utah. So we said, okay, if we got data centers and we got call centers, what's happening in medical devices? Well, what's happening is microelectronics and nanoelectronics are going to basically put a chip on every one of us. It's either going to be embedded in you or it's going to be on the outside of your body. And we're going to be the leaders of those chips so that we can actually drive down the cost of healthcare by making better decisions based upon everybody actually in their iPhone knowing the exact data on their cholesterol, on their, you name it, XYZ. I just pull it up right here because of this little, data chip that I've got on me. And I know, hey, I was going to go to the doctor this month, don't need to go, and I saved the economy a little bit of money. Okay, I'm going to just skip over those other things, but basically the principle here is focused on existing university strengths. They've got to have vast billion-dollar national and international commercialization opportunities, and you hope to leverage your existing strengths, but you recognize nobody's an expert in nanotechnology. That's an emerging technology. How are we going to use nanotechnology? Well, I just said we're using it for microelectronic chips that everybody can walk around with, with their cholesterol count. So, what did we do to start these teams? You got to make sure you don't give too much money to any one team. And so we developed a request for proposal process at the University of Utah. We got 24 proposals, and this was something that I thought was really neat. The 2 senior vice presidents, instead of picking winners across the 24 proposals, they took the 24 proposals and they made them into 8 teams, threw the people into a room and said, come out with a revised proposal, okay? And so all of a sudden, folks had to collaborate on a revised proposal. And those teams, the ones that we picked 8 initially. Each of them got a $5 million 5-year budget to go out and start building a team. And we could talk more about that. How are we doing? I'm going to skip over this slide real quick because it shows we got somebody from Nevada. I don't think they've shown up yet, so I don't want to highlight that guy too much. But we've been able to recruit STAR faculty. We've been able to recruit STAR faculty from around the country. And, if you build it, will they come? No. I mean, they're not just going to come to Nevada because you built the coolest new building. You've got to make sure that they come because they see other collaborators that are going to help them to do their work better. They're first going to look at the human capital that you've got that they can collaborate with, and then they're going to say, oh, well, you got a nice building too, so I think, I'll have a great place to do work and recruit PhDs and master's students from around the country to come and work with them. So we're doing pretty well on that. There's our building. I'd love to show you it's a cornfield just to the north of that. So as you come from North Logan, you're driving across a cornfield, and out of a cornfield emerges that $60 million facility with a $10 million facility right next door to it. But that's on the Innovation Campus at Utah State University up in Logan. That's about 90 miles north of Salt Lake City is where that's located. That Innovation Campus is kind of small right now, but we hope that this is going to be the hub for it. And we're very excited about what we're building up there. We've also been doing some biofuels things. I'll skip over that. Here's what we're building at the University of Utah. We had a land bank at the University of Utah called the golf course. And the retirees were kind of frustrated that we decided to break onto the golf course. But that's where we're building. And that golf course location is actually a great location because we can build a 4-building quadrangle that connects the College of Medicine, the College of Science, and the College of Engineering. And this is a remarkable building. Be happy to talk to you more about that. In that building, what's the kind of work that's going to go on? We already talked about nanotechnology as an emerging technology. It's no longer getting the buzz that it was a few years ago. It was overhyped. Now you just have to figure out what is nanotechnology to us. Hey, what are you doing in molecular biology? What are you doing in small devices? And once you start studying that stuff, you realize the potential of material science and nanoelectrical science, and there's some things to do. This is an example of a guy that we recruited, Masood Tabib-Azar. We also grabbed 2 of his colleagues from Case Western. We cleaned out the whole Case Western team. And the reason we did that is because these guys were frustrated electrical engineers. They needed a medical school to work in, and they didn't have a medical school that really cared about their engineering department. And guess what? Our medical school cares. I just had a presentation from these guys yesterday. Darren Young from Korea, Masood Tabib-Azar from somewhere in the Middle East, Carlos Mastrangelo, who's from Latin America, and the other guy, Gianluca Lazzi from Italy. Right? We don't have a lot of international diversity in Utah, but man, are we recruiting it with our USTAR faculty. And it's really, really fun to see how these guys work together as a team. Okay, I talked about the secret sauce, our political pork, which was the technology outreach program. We basically broke the state up into 5 different sectors, and we said we're going to put a business leader in each one of those regional higher education institutions. It's their job to make sure that what we're doing at the research universities is relevant to the region, and we get together on a monthly basis to review strategy, review metrics, and make sure that we're still on the right track. Let me see. Competitiveness of existing industry. Out of this team that I just talked about, the 5 regional outreach directors, we formed another joint venture with the State Board of Higher Education and our traditional Governor's Office of Economic Development, and we started on something called the Utah Cluster Acceleration Partnership. So we picked our 5 major sectors. We've been meeting with all kinds of people in those sectors to figure out what kind of a glide path are they on for 1 year, 5 year, 20 years, what they need in terms of human capital, what they need in terms of intellectual property to grow. That's a great initiative, and it shows that you can connect technology-based economic development back to traditional economic development. Enhancing the science technology workforce, we used a grant from the Department of Labor to build the first BioTech Incubator. We've got 10th graders through 12th graders, first and second year associate degree people, and 4-year undergraduate folks that are working with 7 incubated biotech companies in the Granite School District facility. This is one of a kind in the country. We understand from the Department of Labor, they're really looking closely at what we're doing there. And it's an experiment, right? You've got to kind of break the old molds and say, how can we experiment? That was an experiment. Increasing access to capital. This is kind of my personal passion. I live in Park City, Utah, which is, to Utah kind of, what Vegas is to you guys. I mean, we get a lot of people coming into Utah to ski. Well, it's more like, going to Tahoe, right? If you don't go to Tahoe, you don't go to Aspen or Vail, you come to Park City. Well, what did I have in Park City? I had hundreds of retired folks, I call them semi-retired folks, that have these massive Rolodexes, and they want to engage in what's going on in Utah, but they don't know anybody in Utah. And, they build the big mansion, and then they go and consult. Where they consult? San Diego, Atlanta, Boston, wherever they came from. I said, how about we get you all together, we get you to put some financial capital into a pool called Angel Capital, and let's start bringing you good deals. And we have 2 meetings with them per month. We bring 6 deals to screen on the first Wednesday of the month, and then we go to 2 deals that we look at with the whole group on the third Wednesday of the month. And we've got 55 high net worth individuals that we brought together in just the last 3 years. That's probably one of my proudest achievements. I talk about the Technology Commercialization Grant. We took our stimulus money, only one of 2 states in the country that didn't spend it on, more cops and stuff like that. Instead, we put it into technology commercialization. I've deployed 78 technology commercialization grants in the last 2 years with stimulus money. The average grant size is $30,000 to $50,000, and it's working really well. Those are just kind of the seed capital that you need to get the angel investors interested. I'm going to blast through the Technology Commercialization Grant Program because I'm down to 1 minute. We could talk about what we've done to build entrepreneurial capacity. We don't have time, so final 2 slides. How do you build your organizational structure, your governance? This is what we did. I'm the executive director. I report to 10 industry veterans, and I meet with them every month and give them my report. The advisory council on the left-hand side represents all of the regional chambers of commerce that signed on to the USTAR program. Okay, so if they signed on to the vision, they get a seat on the advisory council, and then that's the team that I manage. Who are the types of people that are on my board? Dinesh Patel is the #1 venture capitalist in Utah. Scott Anderson is the CEO of our biggest bank. These are the business leaders that started the journey in 2004 with the vision, stayed with us in 2005, and ended up on the governance board. You can see every one of these folks is top-notch, and we sprinkled it with a couple of university faculty as well. Final point, governor's transition, legislature transitions, right? I took Governor Huntsman's plan and I showed it to Governor Herbert, who's our new governor, just inaugurated the other day. And I said, look, Governor, we are a perfect fit with your priorities. His 4 priorities: economic development. Hey, we're doing technology-based economic development. Public and higher education. We're using that to drive the whole process. Energy security. Hey, that's one of our 5 innovation areas. And then infrastructure. It's not just about roads and bridges. It's about research, development, and commercialization centers. So you got to continue to look at what's happening in the legislature and the governor's office and make sure you match up your strategy with those folks. Finally, we're on track, and I'm out of time. So